The smell of incense was still thick in the air when Hai Phuoc slammed his palm on the altar table, right beside my husband's photograph, and said the words I will never forget. You contributed by mouth, sister-in-law. No paperwork, no signature, nothing. Your share is finished. Starting next month, don't bother coming to the store anymore. 32 people sat around that long wooden table. Cousins from Bac Ninh, neighbors who had known my husband since he was a boy selling rice cakes by the train station. My own younger sister, who had traveled 4 hours by bus just for this death anniversary. 32 pairs of eyes turned to me at once, waiting for the widow to cry, to beg, to fall apart the way grieving old women are supposed to fall apart on television. Cam, too, his wife, leaned forward with her manicured hand resting on her husband's arm, and added the kind of sentence that sounds gentle only if you don't listen closely. Think of it as early retirement. Sister, we'll take care of everything from here. I looked at the photograph of my husband on the altar. Bei's face, still young in that picture, the one taken before the store, before the children, before any of this. The incense smoke curled upward past his smiling eyes and dissolved into the rafters of the house he built with his own hands, plank by plank, the year our oldest daughter was born. I smiled. Not a wide smile. Just a small lift at the corner of my mouth. The kind you give a child who has said something foolish but doesn't yet know it. I said nothing. I reached for my teacup, took a slow sip, and set it back down on its saucer without a sound. The silence that followed was longer than 32 people are usually comfortable sitting in. I could feel my sister's hand tighten around her chopsticks. I could hear Hai Phuoc's breathing change, just slightly. The way a man's breathing changes when he expected resistance and received none. Cam Tu's smile faltered for half a second before she rebuilt it, glancing sideways at her husband as if to ask, "Is that all? Is she really not going to fight?" She had no idea. 3 days before that anniversary dinner, I had sat alone in this same house, at this same table, with the lights off except for the small lamp over my writing desk. I had been sitting there many nights, for nearly 10 years, though no one in this family ever thought to ask what an old woman does alone in an empty house after the shop closes. They assumed I sat and prayed. They assumed I sat and remembered. And I did those things too. But mostly, every single evening after I came home from the store, after I had hung up my apron and washed my hands of cement dust and motor oil residue, I sat at that desk and I wrote numbers, dates, amounts received, amounts spent, names of suppliers, prices paid for steel rods and bags of cement, payments collected from contractors who bought on credit and paid in installments. I had been doing this since the year the shop opened, the year Bei first put his trembling, uncertain hands on a ledger and said, "Lon, you understand numbers better than I do. You keep the real one. I'll keep whatever Hai Phuoc wants me to keep for the family." I have always understood numbers. 30 years as the head accountant of a textile mill taught me that numbers do not lie. Do not soften the truth to spare your feelings. Do not change their story depending on who is asking. People lie. Numbers wait, patient as stone, until someone finally asks them the right question. So when Hai Phuoc told 32 witnesses that I had no paperwork, no proof, no rightful claim to the business my husband and I built together, I simply smiled and drank my tea, because I already knew something he did not. There is a saying my grandmother used to whisper to me when I was a girl carrying water up the hill behind our house, back when my shoulders ached and I wanted to put the buckets down and cry. Still, water reflects the sky most clearly. The pond that never moves shows you everything, if only you are patient enough to look. I had been still water for 10 years. I had let them believe I was just an old widow drifting quietly through her remaining days, asking nothing, expecting nothing, understanding nothing of business or money, or the slow theft happening under the same roof where my husband's spirit tablet sat, watching every transaction. They would learn, eventually, what stillness can hide. But that night, I only smiled, set down my teacup, and let them believe they had already won. Bei and I were married for 41 years before the cancer took him, and for 39 of those years, we built something out of almost nothing. We started in 1986. the year the government finally allowed small family businesses to breathe again. Bay had been a bricklayer's assistant, strong hands but no education past the 4th grade, while I had just finished my 3rd year as a junior accountant at the textile mill in Nam Dinh, carrying ledgers home in a cloth bag every evening so I could practice my figures by lamplight after the children were asleep. He used to say I had a mind like an abacus, that he could recite a string of numbers to me once and watch me hold them in my memory for days. I used to say he had hands like a temple carpenter, that he could look at a crooked wall and know exactly where the weakness was hiding before it ever cracked. Together, we opened a small stall selling bricks and cement on the edge of the market in our hometown of Bao Yen. Just bricks at first, then steel rods, then paint, then plumbing fixtures, then the whole catalog of things a growing town needs when its people start building real houses instead of patching old ones with bamboo and mud. I remember the first year clearly, the way you remember the years that nearly broke you. We slept 4 hours a night. Bay loaded and unloaded delivery trucks until his back ached so badly he could not stand straight by evening, and I sat under a single bare bulb, keeping the books, tracking every dong that came in and went out, because I understood something. Bay never fully grasped a business does not fail because it has no customers. It fails because no one is watching where the money actually goes. We had 2 daughters during those years. Thuy was born in the small room behind the shop, the year we finally had enough saved to buy real brick instead of selling it. Mai came 2 years later, and by then we had hired our first employee, a quiet boy named Tan who still works for us today, gray-haired now himself, loyal in a way that money cannot buy. Hai Phuoc, Bay's younger brother, came to us in the 3rd year. He had failed at 3 different jobs in Hanoi and came home with nothing but a suitcase and a long story about bad luck. Bay, being the kind of man who could not watch his own blood go hungry, brought him into the shop without asking me first. I did not object. Family is family, and Bay's gentleness toward his brother was one of the things I loved about him, even when it frustrated me. But I watched Hai Phuoc closely from the first week, the way I had learned to watch numbers quietly, without announcing what I was looking for. He was not lazy. I want to be fair about that. He worked hard enough when someone was watching. But he had a habit, even then, of rounding figures in his own favor when he thought no one would check. A delivery of 40 bags of cement, recorded as 38. A customer payment of 2 million dong, written down as 1,800,000, small amounts. The kind of theft a careless bookkeeper would never notice, and the kind a careful one notices immediately. I never confronted him about those early discrepancies. Instead, I started keeping a second set of numbers, a private notebook I never showed Bay, because I did not want to plant suspicion between 2 brothers who loved each other, the way only men who grew up, sharing one blanket in a cold house, can love each other. I told myself, I was simply being careful. A good accountant always keeps her own record, separate from whatever the official books say, because official books can be edited, and private ones cannot, not once you've already written today's date at the top of the page. The shop grew. By our 10th year, we had moved to the larger building on the road leading toward the district market, the one with the concrete floor and the metal roof that thundered like a drum every time it rained. Bay and I built a small apartment above the storefront, and that was where we raised our daughters, where we lit incense every morning before opening the shutters, where Bay would stand at the doorway each evening, watching the sunset paint the karst mountains gold, and tell me, "Lon, we did this, you and me. No one can ever say we didn't build this with our own hands." He was right. No one could say that. Not honestly. Whatever else happened afterward, that much was true. And it remains true now, etched into every brick and beam of that building, the way the names of ancestors are etched into the wood of an altar. 3 years ago, Bay's illness took him quickly, faster than any of the doctors expected. In his final week, lying in the same bed, where we had slept together for 4 decades, he held my hand and said something I have replayed in my mind every single night since. "Lon, keep the real numbers. Promise me, whatever happens to this family after I'm gone, keep the real numbers. Because someday, someone is going to need to know the truth, and you will be the only one who has it. I promised him. I did not know, that evening, exactly what kind of truth he meant. I only knew that a promise made to a dying man is not the kind of promise you set aside, no matter how many years pass, no matter how quiet you have to become to keep it. The first time Hai Phuoc moved against me, he did it so gently, I almost mistook it for kindness. It was 6 months after Bei's funeral, the rainy season just beginning, the kind of gray afternoon when the karst mountains outside our town disappear behind a curtain of mist and the whole world smells like wet earth and old wood. I was sitting in my usual corner of the shop, behind the small desk where Bei used to greet customers, when Hai Phuoc came and sat across from me with a folder of papers and an expression I had learned, over 30 years of reading faces, across an accountant's desk, to distrust on sight. Sister, he said, using the gentle title he only used when he wanted something. With Brother Bei gone, the business needs to register properly. New ownership documents, new bank accounts, everything updated for the authorities. I've already spoken to a friend who handles this kind of paperwork. He slid the folder toward me. Cam too stood near the doorway, arms crossed loosely, watching with the particular stillness of someone who already knows how this conversation will end. I opened the folder slowly. Inside were ownership transfer documents, already drafted, already typed, with blank lines waiting only for my signature beside Bei's name, now crossed through in red ink and replaced with the words deceased. Share reverted to surviving partner. Surviving partner, I said quietly, tasting the words. Me, Hai Phuoc said, not quite meeting my eyes. It's simpler this way, sister. You never officially registered your portion. Brother Bei handled all that, back when the shop first opened. Your name was never on the original papers, only his and mine. I'm not trying to take anything from you. I just need to make the business legal again, for taxes, for loans, for the bank. I looked at him for a long moment. Outside, rain began tapping against the metal roof, soft at first, then steadier, the way it always built before a real storm settled in over the valley. And what happens to my share? Once the business is legal again under your name alone. Cam too spoke before her husband could answer. You'll still get something, sister. We're not cruel people. A monthly allowance, enough for an old woman living alone. You won't have to worry about money ever again. An allowance. From my own husband's shop, handed to me like alms outside a pagoda gate. I did not sign that day. I told them I needed time to think, that grief still clouded my mind, that an old woman should not rush important decisions, while her husband's incense ash was still warm on the altar. Hai Phuoc's jaw tightened, but he nodded, the patient nod of a man who believes time is on his side. He was not entirely wrong to believe that. Most widows in our town, women my age, raised to defer to their husbands' brothers, to avoid conflict, to accept whatever arrangement the men of the family decided was fair, would have signed within the week simply to keep the peace. But Bei had not married a woman who avoided numbers. He had married a woman who spent 30 years reading balance sheets for a living, who understood that the words surviving partner on a legal document were not an accident of language. Someone had drafted that document with great care. Someone had anticipated exactly this moment, possibly for years. That night, I climbed the narrow stairs to the small storage room above the shop, the one where Bei had kept old receipts and tax records going back decades, boxes no one had touched since his funeral. I lit a single lamp and sat on the dusty floor, going through folder after folder, looking for the original partnership agreement, the one Bei always swore existed, the one that would prove my name belonged on those papers as much as his brother's. I did not find it. What I found instead, tucked behind a stack of old utility bills, was a folder I did not recognize. Inside were photocopies of land documents for the building itself, dated only 8 months earlier, bearing a notary stamp from a district office 2 towns away, far enough that no one local would think to ask questions. The documents listed the building, our building, The one bay built brick by brick, under a new registration. With Hai Phuoc's name as sole owner of the underlying land, the transfer dated 3 months before Bay's death. My husband had been dying in that bed upstairs, while his own brother filed paperwork 2 towns over to claim the ground beneath his feet. I sat very still in that dusty storage room, the lamp flickering against the walls, rain drumming steadily on the roof above me, and for the first time since the funeral, my hands began to shake. Not from grief, from something colder, something that had been waiting patiently inside me for exactly this moment to wake up. I did not confront Hai Phuoc about the land documents. Not yet. A lesser woman might have run downstairs that very night, papers clutched in trembling hands, demanding answers, weeping, accusing. But 30 years of auditing factory accounts taught me something most people never learn. The moment you reveal what you know, you lose the only real advantage you have, which is that the other person does not yet know you know. So I returned the folder exactly as I found it, tucked behind the same stack of utility bills. And I went back downstairs to my small bedroom behind the shop, and I lay awake until the rain stopped sometime near dawn, listening to the gutters drip, thinking about my husband's hand in mine during his final week, the promise I had made him, keep the real numbers. I understood now, with a clarity that felt almost peaceful, exactly what kind of truth he had meant. The following morning, I did something I had not done in nearly a year. I went to the shop early, before Tan unlocked the front shutters, before Hai Phuoc arrived with his thermos of coffee and his easy smile, and I sat at the old desk and opened the official ledger, the one Hai Phuoc had been keeping since Bay's death, the one he believed was the only record anyone would ever check. I compared it, line by line, against my private notebook, the one I had kept faithfully every evening for 10 years, the habit Bay himself had asked me to maintain, the habit no one in this family ever thought worth noticing. Because what could an old woman possibly understand about modern bookkeeping? The discrepancies were small at first. A delivery of roofing sheets recorded as 60 units in the official ledger, 64 in mine. A payment from a regular contractor, Mr. Khan, from the new housing project on the edge of town, recorded as 11 million in the official book. But I distinctly remembered counting 13 million in cash myself, the week before, when Mr. Khan had paid early, and I happened to be sitting at the desk when the money changed hands. 2 million here, 3 million there, spread across months, across dozens of transactions, easy to miss if you were not looking, easy to dismiss as rounding errors or honest mistakes, if you did not have 10 years of patient, quiet documentation, sitting in a locked drawer in your bedroom. I worked through the morning without looking up, without speaking, the way I used to work through quarterly audits at the textile mill decades ago, losing myself entirely in the rhythm of numbers, the only language that never lied to me, even when every person around me had learned to. By the time Hai Phuoc arrived, thermos in hand, humming some popular song from the radio, I had already closed both ledgers and returned them to their places, my face arranged into the same mild, tired expression I had worn every morning since Bay's funeral. "Sister, you're here early," he said, surprised, perhaps even slightly suspicious, though he covered it quickly with his usual warm smile, the smile that had fooled 32 relatives just months before. "I couldn't sleep," I said, which was, for once, entirely true. An old woman's habits. I thought I would tidy the desk a little. He nodded, satisfied, and went about his morning as he always did, calling out cheerful greetings to the delivery drivers, joking with Tan about the weather, utterly unaware that the quiet old widow behind the desk had just begun counting, with absolute precision, exactly how much of her husband's shop had disappeared into his brother's pocket over the past 3 years. That evening, walking home along the narrow road beside the river, the sky bruised purple with the last light of day, I passed the small Buddhist temple at the edge of town, the one Bay and I used to visit every Lunar New Year. An old monk was sweeping the courtyard, the soft scrape of his broom, the only sound besides the wind, moving through the bamboo grove behind the temple wall. I stopped at the gate, watching him work in silence. And I thought about something my grandmother used to say. The same words I had carried with me since childhood. The words that had become, somehow, the quiet compass of my entire life. Bamboo bends in the storm, so it does not break. But remember, granddaughter, bamboo always returns to standing exactly where it was rooted. I had bent for 10 years. I had bowed my head, kept my private notebook, smiled at family gatherings, while a fortune disappeared in small, careful amounts that no one else thought to count. But that night, walking home in the fading light, with the discrepancies in Hai Phuoc's ledger burning clear in my memory, I understood that the storm had finally passed its peak, and bamboo, when it is ready, does not bend forever. I let myself into the quiet house, lit a single stick of incense for Bay, and as the smoke curled upward past his photograph on the altar, I noticed something I had walked past 100 times without truly seeing. Tucked behind the corner of the altar, half hidden by the incense urn, was a small brass key I did not recognize, one that did not belong to any door, drawer, or cabinet I had ever opened in this house. The brass key sat in my palm like something alive, small and cold and impossibly heavy for its size. I turned it over twice, studying the worn edges, the faint scratch marks near the teeth that suggested years of use. It was not a house key, not a shop key, not anything that belonged to the drawers and cabinets I had opened and closed 10,000 times in this home. I sat down on the low stool in front of the altar, the incense still curling its thin gray thread toward the ceiling beams, and I tried to remember. Then it came to me, slow and certain, the way memories surface when you finally stop forcing them. 3 months before Bay died, weak as he already was, he had asked me to bring him a small wooden box from beneath our bed, the one his own father had carved decades ago, the one we kept old photographs in. He had taken something from inside it that day, holding it in his thin fingers while I busied myself folding laundry across the room, pretending not to watch. I never asked what it was. A dying man is entitled to his small private moments, and I had learned, over 41 years of marriage, when to look and when to look away. I went to the bedroom and pulled the wooden box from beneath the bed, brushing away a film of dust that had settled undisturbed since the funeral. Inside, beneath old photographs of our daughters as children, beneath a folded handkerchief embroidered with my initials that I had given him on our wedding day, I found a small metal lockbox I had never seen before, hidden flat against the bottom of the wooden chest. The brass key fit perfectly. Inside the lockbox were documents, carefully folded, the paper already yellowing slightly at the edges. A copy of the original partnership agreement from 1986, the one I had searched for and failed to find upstairs, the one proving my name had indeed been listed as co-owner from the very beginning, not Hai Phuoc's name added later as sole heir, but mine, beside Bay's, in his own careful handwriting and a notary stamp from the district office, dated the same week our shop first opened its shutters. Beneath that document was a letter, written in Bay's unsteady, late-stage handwriting, the kind of handwriting a man produces when his hand has already begun the slow work of leaving his body behind. Lon, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have finally found what I hid for you. I am sorry I could not tell you, while I still had the strength to explain everything properly. 6 months before I got sick, I discovered Hai Phuoc had been moving money. Small amounts at first, then larger ones, into accounts I do not fully understand, accounts connected to land deals 2 towns over. I confronted him once, only once, and he wept and begged forgiveness and swore it would never happen again. And like a fool, like his older brother who has protected him since we were boys, sharing one blanket in our mother's house, I believed him and told no one, not even you, because I did not want to plant suspicion in a family that has already survived so much together. I was wrong to stay silent, and I am asking you now, with whatever strength I have left in this hand, to do what I could not. Watch the numbers, Lon. You always understood them better than I did. If something happens to me, watch the numbers, and when you find the truth, do not be gentle with it the way I was. I have already been too gentle, and look where it has brought us. I love you. I am sorry. Finish what I could not finish. I do not know how long I sat there on the bedroom floor, the letter trembling in my hands, the incense downstairs slowly burning itself into ash, before I understood the full shape of what had been hidden from me, layer beneath layer, for years. My husband had known. He had known about his brother's betrayal months before his death, had confronted him privately, had been deceived again with promises and tears, and had chosen silence rather than tearing apart what remained of his family in his final months on earth. He had carried that secret alone, the way a man carries a stone in his chest, telling no one, not even the wife who shared his bed every night, because he could not bear to give her one more burden while she was already preparing to lose him. And Haifwak, who had wept and sworn it would never happen again, who had held his dying brother's hand and promised forgiveness deserved, had instead used those final months to file land transfer documents 2 towns away, securing the building's ownership for himself, while Bay's body was still warm in its bed. I pressed the letter against my chest, the paper crackling softly, and for the first time since the funeral, I allowed myself to cry, not the polite, restrained tears expected of a widow at a memorial service, but the kind that comes from somewhere far older than grief, a sound I muffled against my own sleeve, so the empty house would not carry it out into the street. There is an old saying about the well that looks calm on the surface, the kind villagers draw water from every morning, without a second thought, never imagining the depth hidden beneath that still, reflective water. I had always thought of myself as that calm surface, the quiet widow no one needed to worry about. But I understood now, sitting on that floor with my husband's final letter pressed against my heart, that the depth beneath me had been building for far longer than even I had realized, fed by a current my husband himself had set in motion before he ever left this world. He had not died trusting his brother. He had died hoping I would find the truth and finish what his gentleness had not allowed him to finish himself. I folded the letter carefully along its original creases and placed it back inside the lockbox, beside the partnership agreement that proved, in Bay's own handwriting and an official notary's stamp, exactly what Haifwak had told 32 relatives I did not possess. Then I closed the lockbox, turned the brass key until it clicked, and sat in the darkening room a long while, listening to the wind move through the bamboo grove outside, thinking not about grief anymore, but about exactly where, in this house full of secrets, I should hide a key that powerful until I was finally ready to use it. I did not act immediately, though every instinct I had ever developed across 30 years of professional auditing screamed at me to march downstairs the next morning and lay every document on Haifwak's desk. Instead, I waited and I worked. The week after I found the lockbox, I began going to the shop earlier than usual, before Tan arrived to unlock the shutters, before Haifwak strolled in with his thermos and his easy laugh. I told everyone I simply could not sleep well since the rainy season began, which was, in its own strange way, no longer entirely a lie. In those quiet morning hours, alone with the official ledger and my own private notebook, I began reconstructing 3 years of transactions with the same patient precision I once applied to factory audits that determined whether workers received their full wages or whether some manager upstream had been skimming from the books. I cross-referenced delivery receipts against bank deposit slips. I matched supplier invoices against the amounts recorded as paid. I traced, line by careful line, where the discrepancies began, how they grew, and most importantly, where the money actually went. What I found exceeded even what I had feared. Haifwak had not simply been pocketing small amounts for personal spending, the kind of petty theft a desperate man commits out of weakness. He had been systematically diverting funds, month after month, into what I eventually traced to a second business, a smaller hardware stall in the next district, registered under Cam2's maiden name, so it would never appear connected to our family shop on any official record. I visited that district once, on the pretext of buying fabric at the market there, and I walked past the stall slowly, an old woman in a conical hat that no one looks at twice. The shelves were stocked with the exact same brands of cement, The exact same suppliers of steel rod and plumbing fixtures we carried in our own shop, inventory that had clearly been quietly redirected from deliveries meant for us. I stood across the street for nearly 20 minutes, watching customers come and go, watching Cam 2 herself emerge briefly from the back room to greet a regular buyer with the warm, practiced smile of a woman who believes she has gotten away with something clever. There is a particular kind of satisfaction that comes from confirming a suspicion with your own eyes, a quiet, private kind of victory that asks for no audience and needs none. I felt it standing on that street corner, the afternoon sun warm against my shoulders, watching the stolen pieces of my husband's life rearranged neatly on someone else's shelves. I did not confront Cam 2. I simply turned and walked back toward the bus stop, my conical hat shielding my face, already calculating in my mind exactly how much inventory, how much cash, how many years of patient theft had built that second shop from nothing. Back home that evening, I added everything to my private notebook, now grown thick with pages, organized by month and category. The way I had once organized factory ledgers for government inspectors who trusted my signature more than they trusted the factory manager's own claims. I created a column I had never needed before. Diverted to second location. The number at the bottom of that column, totaled across 3 years, was large enough that I had to recalculate it twice before I trusted my own arithmetic. It was, I realized, with a strange calm settling over me, very close to the exact value of the land transfer Hai Phuoc had filed 2 towns over. He had not simply taken the building. He had spent 3 years slowly draining the shop of its inventory and its cash flow, building his own parallel business with the proceeds, all while preparing the legal groundwork to claim sole ownership of what remained. My grandmother used to tell me, when I was young and impatient and wanted every injustice corrected the moment I noticed it, that the patient farmer does not dig up the rice seedling to check whether the roots are growing. He waits. He watches the water level. He trusts that what is hidden beneath the soil is doing exactly what it was planted to do, and he acts only when the season is right, not a single day before. I had spent 10 years being patient without fully understanding why. Now, I understood. Every evening, I had spent writing numbers into that private notebook. Every quiet habit Bay had asked me to maintain without ever explaining the full reason, had been preparing me, brick by brick, for exactly this moment. I was not ready to confront them yet. The land documents alone might be challenged in court as a misunderstanding, a hasty filing during a difficult time. The discrepancies in the ledger could be explained away, blamed on careless bookkeeping, on grief, on the chaos following a death in the family. I needed more than suspicion. I needed something so complete, so undeniable, that no lawyer, no relative, no village elder could find a single thread of doubt to pull at. So I kept writing. I kept watching. I let Hai Phuoc and Cam 2 continue believing that the quiet old widow behind the desk understood nothing beyond counting coins for the cash register, while every evening, in the small lamplight of my bedroom, I added one more careful entry to the record that would, eventually, undo everything they believed they had already won. By the time the dry season arrived, Hai Phuoc had stopped pretending to be gentle. It started with small things, the way these things always do. He began making decisions about the shop without consulting me at all, not even the courtesy conversations he had maintained during those first months after Bay's death. New suppliers were chosen, prices were changed. He moved my old desk, the one Bay had given me on our 10th wedding anniversary, from its place near the front window to a cramped corner near the storage room, claiming he needed the space near the door for a new display of imported tools. I said nothing. I moved my things quietly, the way still water moves around an obstacle, rather than crashing against it, and I continued sitting at that desk every morning, watching, recording, waiting. Then came the afternoon. He finally brought the transfer documents back, the same folder he had shown me 6 months earlier, except this time, there was no gentleness in his voice at all. "Sister, this has gone on long enough," he said, dropping the folder onto my new corner desk. with more force than necessary. The bank needs updated ownership records by the end of this month, or they'll freeze the business account entirely. You need to sign today. I opened the folder slowly, the same way I always did, giving nothing away in my expression. The documents had changed slightly since the first version. This time, beneath the line listing Hai Phuoc as sole surviving partner, there was an additional clause, one transferring the underlying land registration as well, the same land I now knew. He had already secretly claimed 2 towns over, while Bei was still dying upstairs. And if I don't sign? I asked, my voice even, almost mild. Something shifted in his face, a flicker of irritation breaking through the patient mask he usually wore so carefully. Then the business cannot continue legally, and that hurts everyone, including you. You'll have nothing, sister. No income, no role here. Nothing but an empty house, and whatever small savings you have left. Is that really what you want? At your age? Cam too appeared in the doorway then, as she so often did, perfectly timed, as though she had been listening from just beyond the curtain the entire conversation. We've already spoken to a lawyer in the city, she said, her voice carrying that same casual cruelty I remembered from the death anniversary dinner, months before. He says widows without registered ownership documents have very little standing in inheritance disputes here. The courts favor whoever holds the paperwork. Sister, not whoever feels entitled, by sentiment. Whoever holds the paperwork. I almost laughed, though I kept my face still, kept my hands folded calmly in my lap, the way I had learned to, during 40 years of sitting across desks from men who underestimated quiet women. I understand, I said instead. Give me until after the next death anniversary. I would like to honor my husband properly before I make any final decisions about his shop. Hai Phuoc exhaled, clearly frustrated, clearly believing this was simply another delay tactic from a grieving old woman clinging to sentiment rather than facing practical reality. But he agreed, because agreeing cost him nothing. He already believed, with the absolute confidence of a man who has never once been seriously challenged, that the outcome was already decided, that an elderly widow with no documents and no allies would eventually sign whatever was placed in front of her, simply to avoid further conflict. That evening, walking home along the river road, I passed a group of children flying kites in the field beside the old pagoda, their bright paper diamonds straining against the wind, tethered only by thin strings, held tightly in small, determined hands. I stopped to watch them for a moment, the way I sometimes did, remembering my own daughters running through that same field decades ago. One boy's kite suddenly dove, twisting wildly, threatening to crash into the dirt, and for a moment it seemed certain to fall. But the boy did not panic. He simply let out more string, allowing the kite to fall further, deeper into what looked like certain disaster, before pulling sharply at exactly the right moment, catching a fresh current of wind that sent the kite soaring higher than it had flown all afternoon. Sometimes you must let the string go slack before you can pull hard enough to rise. I had been letting the string go slack for 10 years. Watching Hai Phuoc believe he was winning, watching him grow bolder and more careless with every month that passed, because no one had yet shown him the consequence of his own greed. I had one more death anniversary to wait through. One more performance of patient, grieving silence to maintain. But I understood now, walking home in the fading light with the children's laughter still drifting behind me, that the moment was finally approaching when I would stop letting the string go slack and begin, at last, to pull. I found the second letter 4 days before the next death anniversary, hidden inside the lining of Bei's old work jacket, the one I had never been able to bring myself to give away, despite 3 years of telling myself I should. I was searching the closet for nothing in particular, simply moving through one of those restless evenings when grief returns without warning, and you find yourself touching things that still smell faintly of someone who is gone, when my fingers brushed against an uneven seam in the jacket's inner pocket. I tore it open carefully, my hands already trembling before I even understood why. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, far more recent than the first letter, the handwriting weaker, more fragile, written during what I now understood must have been the final 2 weeks of his life, after I had already found him too exhausted most days to speak more than a few sentences at a time. Lan, my love, forgive me for what I am about to tell you, because I should have told you the moment I learned it, and instead I have carried it alone these final days, too ashamed and too weak to say the words aloud to your face. 2 weeks ago, in a moment of clarity I do not fully understand even now, I asked Hai Phuoc to bring me the shop's tax documents so I could review them one last time before I lost the strength to understand such things at all. He hesitated, just slightly, the way a man hesitates when he is deciding whether to tell a small lie or a large one. I noticed it the way you taught me to notice things. All those years of watching you read people's faces across our kitchen table. I pressed him, weak as I was, and eventually he confessed something far worse than the money he had already been moving. He told me that 6 months before my diagnosis, he had taken out a business loan against the shop's name, a significant sum, using forged signatures, mine included, on documents I never saw and never approved. The money from that loan, he admitted, weeping, swearing it was only temporary, had gone toward purchasing the land for his second shop under Cam 2's name, the same land and the same shop you may have already discovered by the time you read this letter. Lan, the debt from that loan is still outstanding, registered under both our names as original shop partners, meaning that legally, you are still responsible for half of it, even though you never signed a single document, never saw a single dong of that borrowed money, never knew it existed, until perhaps this very moment. Reading these words, I am too weak and too cowardly to say aloud. I confronted him one final time. The week before I lost the strength to speak clearly at all. I told him he must come clean to you, must make this right before I died, must not leave you carrying a debt and a betrayal you knew nothing about. He promised me he would. He held my hand and wept and promised, the same way he promised 6 months earlier when I first discovered the smaller thefts, and like a fool, an old, dying, exhausted fool who simply wanted peace in his final days rather than one more battle, I believed him again. I do not believe he kept that promise. I am writing this because some part of me, even now, knows my brother well enough to understand that fear makes him generous with words and stingy with actual courage. If you are reading this letter, it likely means he never told you any of this. And the loan, the forged signatures, the debt bearing your name without your knowledge, all of it is still waiting somewhere in a bank file, ready to surface and destroy whatever peace you have managed to build after I am gone. I am sorry, Lan. I am sorry I was not strong enough to fix this myself, while I still had strength left to fix anything at all. I am sorry. I chose a few more weeks of fragile peace with my brother over protecting you from what was coming. You deserved a husband brave enough to face this directly, and instead you got a man too tired and too sick, and too afraid of losing what little family he had left. Finish what I could not finish. Forgive me for asking this of you when I should have done it myself. I sat on the floor of our bedroom for a very long time, after reading that letter, the jacket still in my lap, the fabric worn soft from years of wear, still faintly holding the shape of the man who once filled it. This was not simply theft anymore. This was forgery. My own name signed onto documents I never saw. A debt manufactured in secret and quietly attached to my future without my knowledge or consent, all while my husband lay dying upstairs, too weak to protect me from what his own brother had already set in motion. I thought of the old proverb my grandmother used to recite when village families fractured over inheritance disputes, the kind of bitter conflict that could turn brothers into strangers within a single season. Blood may be thicker than water, but greed is thicker than blood, and it stains far deeper than either one. For the first time since Bey's death, I did not cry. The grief that had carried me through that first letter had hardened now into something else entirely, something with edges, something that no longer asked for sympathy but instead began, very quietly, to calculate exactly how a forged loan, a stolen land deed, and 3 years of carefully documented theft could be assembled into a single undeniable case, the kind no lawyer, no court, and no village gathering would ever be able to dismiss as an old woman's sentimental misunderstanding. I folded the letter and placed it inside the lockbox, beside the first one, beside the original partnership agreement, and I sat in the dark a long while, my hand resting on the worn fabric of my husband's jacket, before I finally rose, lit a fresh stick of incense for him, and whispered a promise into the smoke that I intended, this time, to keep completely. The week before the death anniversary, I did not write a single new figure in my private notebook. There was nothing left to add. The picture was already complete. Every column accounted for, every discrepancy traced back to its source, every piece of paper exactly where it needed to be. Instead, I spent that week preparing in ways no one in the family would have recognized as preparation at all. I visited my niece's husband, a young lawyer named Duong who had been my evening student years ago, back when I taught basic bookkeeping classes at the District Adult Education Center, the kind of unpaid teaching I did, simply because I believed every honest tradesman deserved to understand his own numbers. He had grown into a sharp, careful man, the sort who listened twice as much as he spoke, and when I laid the lockbox's contents across his desk, the partnership agreement, both letters, the reconstructed ledger discrepancies, the photographs I had quietly taken of the second shop's inventory, he went very still. "Auntie," he said finally, using the respectful term he had called me since he was a teenage boy struggling with fractions in my evening class, "this is not just a family dispute. This is fraud. Forged signatures on a loan document. This alone could mean criminal charges, not just a civil inheritance case. I am not interested in sending him to prison," I told him honestly, and I meant it. I am interested in the truth being known, in the building and the business that belong rightfully to me and to my husband's memory being protected, and in my brother-in-law understanding, finally, that the quiet old woman behind the desk was never as foolish as he assumed. Duong nodded slowly, already organizing the documents into the careful sequence a courtroom would require, though we both understood that the documents alone, however damning, were not quite enough. Paper convinces lawyers and judges, but this was also a family matter, witnessed publicly 6 months earlier when Hai Phuoc had humiliated me in front of 32 relatives at my husband's own altar, and I intended for the truth to be revealed, exactly where the lie had first been spoken, in front of the same witnesses, beside the same photograph of my husband's smiling face. I spent the remaining days quietly notifying certain relatives, the ones I trusted, the ones who had looked uncomfortable but said nothing during that first dinner, the ones whose loyalty to Bei's memory ran deeper than their fear of conflict with Hai Phuoc. I did not tell them what I had discovered. I only asked them to attend this year's anniversary, to come a little early if they could, to bring nothing but themselves and their willingness to witness whatever happened. My sister, when I finally told her a small part of the truth over tea one quiet afternoon, gripped my hand so tightly, her rings pressed into my skin. "Lan, are you certain? Once you do this, there is no going back to pretending we are still one peaceful family." I thought of Bei's letter, his trembling apology, his final request written in handwriting weakened by illness but strengthened, somehow, by a kind of love that refused to let injustice simply pass unanswered into silence. I thought of the Stillwater pond my grandmother used to describe, patient and reflective for years, until the day someone finally needed to see exactly what depths it had been holding all along. We stopped being one peaceful family the day he forged my name onto a debt I never agreed to. I told my sister, quietly, "I am not breaking the peace. I am simply going to show everyone the peace was already broken, and has been broken for years, while I was the only one who knew." The night before the anniversary, I sat alone at the altar, the lockbox open beside me, every document arranged in the precise order Duong and I had agreed upon, each piece building toward the next like steps of a staircase. No one would be able to climb back down once the truth began its ascent. I lit incense for Bei, watching the thin smoke rise and curl exactly as it had on the night he first showed me, without words, the existence of a key I did not yet understand. I thought about the storm clouds I had watched building over the karst mountains every rainy season of my life in this valley, the way the sky would darken slowly at first, almost gently, giving every farmer and fisherman ample warning to secure their boats and cover their crops before the real fury finally arrived. I had given Haifuok and Cam too 10 years of gentle, gathering clouds, 10 years of quiet warning signs. They were too confident, too greedy, too certain of their own victory to ever notice. Tomorrow, at the same table where they had humiliated me in front of 32 witnesses, beneath the same photograph of my husband's patient, watchful eyes, the sky was finally going to open. The death anniversary table was set exactly as it had been the year before. The same long wooden surface, polished to a soft shine. The same brass candlesticks flanking Bay's photograph on the altar. The same 30-some relatives arriving in waves throughout the afternoon, embracing each other, settling into chairs, the smell of incense and simmering broth, filling the house the way it had every year since the shop first opened its doors. I wore my best dark green Aude that day, the one Bay had bought me for our 30th wedding anniversary, and I had asked Tan, loyal Tan, who had worked beside my husband since he was a boy, to arrive early and help arrange one additional item on the altar table, a slim leather folder I had prepared the night before with Duong's careful guidance. Haifuok arrived mid-afternoon with Cam Tu at his side, both of them dressed well, both of them moving through the gathered relatives with the easy confidence of people who believe, after 6 months of silence from the difficult widow, that the matter of the shop's ownership has finally been settled in their favor. "Sister," Haifuok said warmly, finding me near the kitchen as I helped arrange dishes of sticky rice and roasted chicken. "I trust you've had time to think clearly since our last conversation. We can finalize the paperwork properly today, in front of the family, so everyone understands the business is in capable hands going forward." "Of course," I said, my voice as mild as it had been every day for the past 10 years. "I think that's a very good idea. Let's discuss it properly, in front of everyone, the way important family matters deserve to be discussed." Something in my tone must have struck him as different, though he could not have said exactly how. He studied me for a moment longer than necessary, before nodding and moving toward his usual seat at the head of the table, the seat that had once belonged to Bay. Dinner proceeded the way these dinners always did. The ritual bowing before the altar, the lighting of fresh incense, the murmured prayers asking my husband's spirit to bless the gathered family with health and prosperity for the coming year. I performed each step carefully, my hands steady, my expression calm, while inside my chest, something had finally settled into the particular stillness that comes only after years of patient waiting reach their natural conclusion. When the meal was finished and the dishes cleared, Haifuok rose from his seat, tapping his glass for attention the way he always did before, making some announcement designed to remind everyone of his authority. "Family," he began, "as most of you know, since my brother's passing, I've taken on full responsibility for the shop, ensuring it continues to provide for everyone. Today, I'd like to finalize the ownership transfer properly, with the family as witness, so there's no confusion going forward about who carries this responsibility." He looked toward me, gesturing for the folder of documents Cam Tu had already produced from her handbag, the same transfer papers I had refused to sign twice before. "Sister Lan has agreed it's time to make this official," he continued, his confidence filling the room the way it always had, unchallenged, assumed. I rose slowly from my seat. The room quieted, the same way it had quieted exactly 1 year earlier, when he first humiliated me in this very spot. "You're right that it's time to make things official," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the table. "But not the documents you're holding." I walked to the altar, where Tan had already placed the leather folder beside Bay's photograph, exactly as we had arranged. I picked it up and returned to the table, opening it slowly, deliberately, the way I had once opened files in front of government auditors who needed to be convinced of a truth they did not yet wish to believe. "This is the original partnership agreement, from 1986, I said, laying the first document flat on the table for everyone to see. "Both names are listed, my husband's and mine, witnessed by a notary, filed the same week our shop first opened. I am not an unregistered widow without claim, brother-in-law. I have been a legal partner in this business since before some of you in this room were born. A murmur moved through the relatives. Hai-Fuok's confident expression flickered, just slightly, the same flicker I had seen the very first time I refused to sign his papers. This, I continued, laying down the second document, is a record of inventory and cash diverted from this shop over the past 3 years, redirected to a second business registered under Cam 2's maiden name in the next district. Every figure here is cross-referenced against the official ledger Hai-Fuok himself has been keeping since my husband's death. Cam 2's face had gone pale, her hand frozen on the table's edge. And this, I said, my voice steady even as the room around me had fallen completely silent, except for the soft hiss of incense smoke, is a loan document bearing my forged signature, taken out against this shop's name, the proceeds of which funded the land purchase for that same second business. I never signed this document. I never saw it until after my husband's death, but my name is on it nonetheless, which means, brother-in-law, that what you have built in secret these past years was built partly on fraud committed against your own sister-in-law, while your brother lay dying upstairs. The silence that followed was different from the silence 1 year earlier. The silence after I had simply smiled and said nothing. This silence had weight, had teeth, had 30 relatives staring at Hai-Fuok with expressions shifting rapidly from confusion to dawning, horrified understanding. That's not, Hai-Fuok started, his voice cracking slightly. Those numbers, that's not what it looks like, sister. I can explain. You can, I said calmly. And you will. But not to me. I've already spoken with a lawyer. These documents have been reviewed, and copies are already filed where they need to be filed. I am not interested in destroying you, brother-in-law. I am interested only in the truth finally being spoken aloud in this house, in front of my husband's photograph, exactly where you once told 32 people I had no rightful claim to anything. I paused, letting my eyes move slowly around the table, settling at last on his face. You said I contributed by mouth, with no paperwork. You were wrong. I have had the paperwork the entire time. I simply chose to wait until the right moment to show it. What happened in the following weeks unfolded with the particular speed of a structure that has been quietly rotting from within for years, waiting only for someone to finally lean against the weak beam, holding it all together. Duong filed the civil claim within days, supported by the partnership agreement, the reconstructed ledger, and the photographic evidence of the second shop's inventory. The forged loan document, however, changed everything, because forgery is not simply a family dispute that village elders can quietly mediate over tea. Forgery is a crime. And once Duong submitted that document to the appropriate authorities, the matter moved beyond what Hai-Fuok's charm or Cam 2's careful smiles could manage. The bank, when contacted regarding the loan, quickly distanced itself from any responsibility, eager to demonstrate it had been deceived as thoroughly as I had. Their internal review confirmed what I already knew, that the signature on the loan documents did not match any verified sample of my handwriting on file, that the loan officer who had approved it years earlier had since left the bank under circumstances the manager declined to discuss in detail, though his tone suggested those circumstances had not been entirely innocent either. Hai-Fuok came to my house 11 days after the anniversary dinner, alone, without Cam 2. His usual confidence entirely gone, replaced by something I had genuinely never seen on his face before. Fear. Sister, please, he said, standing in my doorway, refusing to meet my eyes the way he had refused all those months ago, when he first brought me the transfer documents. If this goes further, I could lose everything. Cam 2's name is on the second shop, but everyone knows it was my decision, my doing. There could be criminal charges. Please, withdraw the complaint. I'll sign the shop back over to you completely. The land too. Everything. Just please. Make this stop. I studied him for a long moment, this man who had once been a frightened boy, arriving at our door with nothing but a suitcase and Bay's unconditional brotherly love to shelter him, who had grown, slowly and quietly, into someone capable of forging his dying brother's wife's signature without a flicker of hesitation. "I am not interested in destroying your life," I said finally. And I meant it, though every word cost me something to say calmly, rather than with the anger that had every right to live in my voice. "But I am also not interested in pretending none of this happened simply because you are frightened of consequences now that they have finally arrived. What do you want?" Then, his voice had dropped to something almost pleading. "I want the shop and the land returned to their rightful, legal ownership, fully and completely. With proper documentation this time, witnessed and notarized correctly. I want the second shop's remaining inventory returned, or its value compensated. And I want you to understand, finally, that Bay protected you his entire life, even in his dying weeks. Even when he had every right to expose what you had done, you repaid that protection by stealing from his widow." He was crying by then, the kind of unguarded crying I had not seen from him since he was a young man newly arrived from Hanoi, defeated and ashamed, and uncertain whether his older brother would take him in. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said. "It started small. A few extra bags of cement here, a payment recorded wrong there. I told myself it didn't matter, that the shop was generous enough to absorb it. Then Cam too wanted the second store, wanted us to have something of our own that wasn't always in Brother Bay's shadow, and I kept telling myself I would stop. And I never did. I did not comfort him. I did not tell him it was understandable, that family pressures and a wife's ambitions excuse forging documents and stealing from a dying man's wife. Some comforts are not mine to give, and offering them would only have cheapened the years of patient documentation it had taken to bring this truth into daylight. "The civil case will proceed regarding the property and the inventory," I told him. "Whether the forgery becomes a criminal matter depends on choices you make now, how completely and honestly you cooperate with returning what was taken. That decision belongs to the authorities and to Duong's judgment, not to family sentiment." He left my house that evening with nothing resolved, exactly as I intended, because I had learned, over 10 years of patient watching, that men who beg for mercy, while standing in the wreckage of their own choices, are rarely transformed by that mercy alone. They are transformed, if they transform at all, by finally facing the full weight of consequences they spent years assuming would never arrive. Within a month, the second shop closed quietly, its remaining inventory transferred back to our store, under Duong's supervision. Cam too, I heard through relatives, had moved back to her parents' village 2 districts away, unwilling to remain in a community that now knew exactly what kind of business she had built and how. Hai Phuoc avoided criminal charges in the end, largely because he cooperated fully once the weight of the evidence made any further denial pointless, returning what funds remained and signing, finally, complete and properly notarized documents restoring my legal ownership of the shop and the land beneath it. I thought, in those weeks, about the word he had used at the anniversary dinner 1 year earlier. Burden. He had called me, in everything but the word itself, a burden too old and too irrelevant to matter, a widow who could simply be managed and dismissed. The truth, delivered finally and completely, had answered that cruelty without my ever needing to say a single harsh word in return. The documents had spoken for me, the way numbers always speak, patiently, precisely, until someone finally asks them the right question. A year has passed since that second death anniversary, the one where the truth finally rose to the surface of the still water that had been holding it for so long. The shop looks much the same as it always did, the same metal roof that thunders like a drum during the rainy season, the same shelves of cement bags and steel rod and plumbing fixtures, the same wooden desk near the front window, where I sit each morning, though I moved it back to its original place myself. The week after everything was settled, I did not become wealthy from what was returned to me. The inventory recovered from the second shop, the land properly re-registered in my name, alongside the memory of Bay's, the modest settlement that compensated 3 years of diverted funds, all of it, simply restored, what should never have been taken in the first place. I am not richer than I was before Hai Phuoc's betrayal began. I am, if anything, only whole again, which I have come to understand, is worth considerably more than wealth alone. Hai Phuoc still lives in our hometown, though our relationship remains careful, distant, the kind of polite formality two people maintain when too much has happened between them to ever fully return to what came before. He sends a small envelope of money each Lunar New Year. A gesture I think is meant as much for his own conscience as for any genuine reconciliation, and I accept it quietly, the way you accept an apology that arrives too late to undo what it apologizes for, but is still, in its own small way, better than no apology at all. Tan still works the front counter, gray-haired now, steady as he has always been, and last spring, I made him a full partner in the business, his name added properly to the same kind of legal documents I once searched for, so desperately, in a dusty storage room above this very shop. Bei would have wanted that, I think. He always said Tan had the same honest hands as a man who builds rather than takes. My daughters, Thuy and Mai, both visit more often now than they did during that difficult year, bringing their own children to run through the shop's narrow aisles the way they once did as girls themselves, small hands reaching for things they shouldn't touch while I pretend. The way Bei once pretended not to notice. Each morning, before I unlock the shutters, I still light incense at the small altar I keep behind the front desk, a smaller version of the one at home, because Bei always believed a business should begin its day the same way a family does, with gratitude and remembrance before anything else. I watch the thin gray smoke rise and curl toward the ceiling beams, exactly as it did the evening Hai Phuoc first told me, in front of 32 witnesses, that I had no rightful claim to anything my husband and I built together. I think, some mornings, about my grandmother's voice, the one I carried with me as a girl, climbing the hill, with water buckets aching against my shoulders, the one that returned to me 1,000 times during those 10 patient years of quiet documentation. Still, water reflects the sky most clearly. The pond that never moves shows you everything, if only you are patient enough to look. I understand now, in a way I could not fully understand, as a young woman, that stillness was never weakness. It was simply depth, waiting for the right moment to be seen. Last week, a young woman came into the shop, newly widowed herself, her husband's small construction business left tangled in confusion because, like so many couples in our generation, the paperwork had always seemed less important than the daily work of building something together. She sat across from my desk, her hands twisting nervously in her lap, asking if I might help her understand the ledgers her husband left behind, numbers that meant nothing to her grieving, exhausted mind. I poured her tea, the way I always do for customers who need a moment before they're ready to talk business, and I told her something I wish someone had told me, all those years ago, before I understood what patient, careful numbers could someday protect. Keep your own record, separate from whatever anyone else tells you the truth is. Write down what you see with your own eyes, what you count with your own hands. Numbers do not lie, even when the people standing closest to you do, and someday, if you ever need them, they will be waiting exactly where you left them, patient as still water, ready to finally show the world what depth was hidden beneath the surface all along. She left an hour later with a small notebook I gave her from the shop's supply shelf, the same kind I have used every evening for the past 11 years, and as I watched her walk down the road toward the market, I found myself smiling, not the small, careful smile I once gave 32 relatives at a dinner table, where I was called a burden, but something wider, something that belonged entirely to me. I returned to my desk, lit a final stick of incense for the evening, and watched the smoke rise once more toward the ceiling beams, curling and dissolving exactly as it always had, exactly as it always would, patient water, finding its own quiet way home. To every parent who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or quietly written off by the very people they sacrificed everything for, I hope this story reminded you of something important. Being patient is not the same as being powerless. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay quiet, keep your own record of the truth, and wait for the moment that truth is finally ready to be heard. If this story meant something to you, please give it a like, and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps these stories reach more people who might need to hear them. If you were in her position, would you have forgiven him in the end, or walked away for good? Let me know in the comments.